afferent neuron take in information and translate it to an electrical signal that gets sent to the central nervous system. Interneuron act as sensory processing centers that determine the magnitude of the response to the incoming stimulus. Efferent neuron takes the information from the interneuron and send it to the effectors, which activate a response. Our group has carried out the experiment to determine the differences between swallowing after drinking water and without drinking water. Next, to study the spinal reflexes and reactions in human. Lastly, to determine the reaction time to sight and reaction time to touch.
So, discussion of swallowing reflex. Based on swallowing reflex experiment, the saliva was swallowed easily at the first, but it was getting difficult to swallow twice at one time. This is because the saliva will act as a stimuli in the mouth cavity. When the saliva had swallowed at the first time, there is no more saliva, there is no more stimuli. However, while drinking water, it feels easier to swallow the saliva because the water acts as a stimulus to replace saliva in the mouth cavity to stimulate the muscle of the esophagus to swallow. Then, there are a few precaution steps taken during this activity. Firstly, make sure your mouth is clean with water to get a better observation, and do not drink when slouched or laying down.
Now, the first question is, why is it difficult to swallow our saliva in rapid succession? Is swallowing a completely voluntary action? To answer the question, yes, it is difficult to swallow our saliva in rapid succession because there's no more saliva to act as stimuli for the swallowing reflex to happen after swallowing for the first time. Swallowing saliva for the first time decreases the amount of saliva in the mouth cavity. Saliva can be swallowed with ease only when the salivary gland had produced enough saliva. Swallowing is not completely voluntary. It is both voluntary and involuntary. The act of collecting saliva in the mouth is a voluntary action, while swallowing the saliva down the esophagus by peristalsis is an involuntary action. Next, explain the ability to swallow in rapid succession when drinking water compared to just swallowing saliva in your mouth cavity. It is easier to swallow in rapid succession when drinking water compared to just swallowing saliva in mouth cavity. This is because when water is present, it will act as a stimuli instead of the saliva, and salivary gland don't have to produce the saliva in a large number to swallow.
So next, discussion of reaction time to sight. Based on experiment reaction time to sight, the time lapse between the experimenter and subject is never up to 1 minute because the reaction of the sight is faster. Because of that, this experiment is proven that the time lapse between experimenter and subject is decreasing as the number of the trial is increasing. This shows that the subject improves as the practice increase. So there are many preparation steps that taken from this experiment. Firstly, this activity should be repeated at least 10 times to get the average value. Secondly, make sure they not take any caffeine or drugs before going to start this experiment. Lastly, this experiment should be conducted in a quiet room to prevent the distraction.
The question is there any evidence that the subject improves with practice? Yes, the subject improves with practice because the time lapse decreases as time goes on with trials. As you can see in the graph here, the time lapse decreases for each trial.
Materials needed are stopwatch, measuring tape, and threads.
Next discussion, reaction time to touch. Based on the experiment, reaction time to touch, the time lapse is decreased as the subject already repeating by doing this activity cause the body practice the activity and get the response quickly. This is because the cerebral reflex in the brain were involved to process and impulse to be sent to effector. The precautions that they taken from this experiment is make sure the subject eyes are closed tightly during this experiment. Next, make sure both of the stopwatch begins at the same time. Then the experiment was repeated 10 times to get an average result. There are a few ethical rules while experimenting is ask specific permission to the participant for video recording.
The first question is the subject's reaction time longer in the experiment 6.3 reaction to touch compared to experiment 6.2 reaction to sight? If so, why? The subject's reaction time is longer in the experiment 6.3, which is reaction to touch, compared to experiment 6.2, which is reaction to sight. This is due to the nerve pathway between foot to finger being longer compared to the nerve pathway between eyes to finger. The second question is, which of the reflexes that you have investigated are spinal reflexes and which are cerebral? Explain your answer. Reaction time to sight and touch are cerebral reflexes because it is a voluntary action and brain is involved for controlling voluntary movements, while swallowing reflex is a spinal reflex as it is an involuntary action and does not involve the brain. The third question is, what other reflexes are shown by humans? What parts of the CNS, spinal, or cerebral are involved in each case? Other reflexes shown by humans are knee-jerk reflex, withdrawal reflex, and biceps reflex, which all involves the spinal cord.
From the swallowing reflex experiment, we can conclude that swallowing in rapid succession when drinking is much easier than just swallowing saliva in your mouth cavity. Next, two types of reflex were also obtained from the touch reflex experiment, which is spinal and cerebral reflex. From the experiment, we found out that cerebral reflex is a voluntary reflex where the brain was involved in processing impulse. Some examples of cerebral reflex are reaction to sight and touch reflex. In other hand, spinal reflex is an involuntary reflex. This reaction does not involve the brain in processing impulse. Swallowing reflex and knee-jerk reflex are examples of cerebral reflex.